I was folding laundry when I heard the mail drop. Just a soft thump at the door. Nothing unusual. But that morning, that thump changed everything. There it was. A newspaper folded in half. I only noticed it because my name was on the front page. Claire Bennett, age 31. Beloved daughter, remembered fondly. I blinked. A photo. My photo. A smile I barely remembered giving. The headline above it? Local family mourns daughter lost too soon. I dropped the laundry. My knees buckled and I had to grab the door frame to keep from falling. I wasn't dead. I wasn't missing. I was right here. Breathing, alive, still hurting, still trying to rebuild after everything they did to me. But now I was also, apparently, gone. For a few seconds, I thought it had to be a mistake. A misprint. Someone with the same name. But the photo, the exact photo I'd posted years ago on my old Facebook. The obituary mentioned where I was born, my high school, my hobbies, baking, piano, hiking. This wasn't some coincidence. This was my family. They declared me dead. It wasn't always like this. Once we were close. A picture-perfect family, at least from the outside. My dad ran a contracting business, my mom managed the house, and my brother Jake and I were inseparable. We used to build forts in the backyard until sunset. But when you grow up in a house where silence is mistaken for peace, you learn to swallow the truth. It started falling apart after Mom died. A heart attack, sudden and cruel. We were all broken in our own way, but Dad became someone I didn't recognize. Colder, shorter, more tired. Jake drifted into his own world. I tried to hold us together. I thought love was enough. I was wrong. The night it all came undone is still burned into my memory. I had found inconsistencies in the company's finances. I worked part-time for Dad's business, handling invoices and payroll. Nothing major. But one day, I noticed thousands of dollars missing. Again and again. At first, I thought it was an error. Then I found the truth. Jake had been embezzling. Quietly. Methodically. Gambling debts, I later found out. I didn't go to the police. I went to Dad. I thought I was doing the right thing. He didn't say a word for a long time. Just stared at me. Then he finally spoke. "You always were the jealous one." The words hit harder than any slap. "You want to ruin your brother? For what? Attention? Claire?" He shook his head. "We're not family anymore." I begged. I cried. I tried to show him the evidence, but he wouldn't listen. The next morning, I was locked out of the office systems. Then the locks on the house changed. Then came the final blow. He had emptied the joint savings account Mom left us. The one in both our names. Everything she'd saved for me. Gone. That was the day I stopped being Claire Bennett, daughter and sister. I became Claire Bennett, nobody. They cut me off so cleanly it was surgical. I couldn't reach Jake. Dad never returned my calls. Relatives went silent. Friends I'd grown up with stopped replying. I was shut out of my own life, like I had never existed. So I left. I packed up what little I had, changed my number, moved 3 states over, and started again. Quietly, carefully. No social media, no calls, just survival. But even in exile, I never imagined this. To open a newspaper and read your own obituary? To see your life summed up in past tense? It wasn't an accident. This was intentional. This was war. And as I stood in the doorway, trembling hands gripping the edge of the page, I realized something I hadn't dared admit for years. They wanted me gone. Not just forgotten. Erased. But I wasn't gone. And I sure as hell wasn't done. Because if they wanted me dead, they were about to see how alive I really was. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the newspaper still spread out in front of me like a crime scene. I'd barely slept. I kept waiting to wake up. Kept waiting for a knock at the door. A phone call. Something. Anything to tell me this was all a misunderstanding. but no one came. No one called. The world outside moved on like it always did. But inside me, something had cracked open. Something cold, something steady. They didn't just forget me. They'd buried me. And now I needed to know why. I started with the only clue I had, the obituary. I read it again, this time slowly. Every word felt like a dagger. Claire passed away peacefully in her sleep after a long battle with depression. She is remembered fondly by her loving father Richard, her brother Jacob, and extended family and friends. Lies. All of it. I'd never been diagnosed with depression. Never attempted anything. I hadn't even been sick. There was no battle, no peace. Just a cold declaration that I no longer existed. The funeral, it said, had taken place 6 days ago. 6. They didn't even wait a week before turning the page on me. I typed my name into the public records database, heart pounding as the search bar spun. When the result popped up, I felt physically ill. Deceased. Claire Bennett. Date of death, August 14th. Cause, natural causes. Filed by R. Bennett. My father had declared me dead. Officially. Legally. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. It wasn't just a public obituary. This was a death certificate. My identity had been erased. I tried logging into my old email, the one tied to my bank and my student loans. The password didn't work. I clicked Forgot Password and got the message. Account deactivated. Deceased status confirmed. I tried my health insurance portal. Same thing. Little by little, I saw it happening. My old life, piece by piece, was being cut off. Locked. Removed. Like I'd never been real at all. And that's when I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about access. Money. Insurance. Inheritance. My mother's estate had never been fully settled after her death. She had left certain things in my name. A small life insurance policy, some bonds, a trust for education. I hadn't touched most of it. I didn't even know how to access it back then. But someone else had. Someone had waited. And then, when the time was right, they killed me. On paper. The phone buzzed suddenly. A notification. I jumped. New photo tagged. Jacob Bennett. My brother. His social media wasn't private anymore. I clicked through before I could think twice. A smiling group photo? My dad, Jake. A woman I didn't recognize holding a toddler. They were at a beach house. One I knew. Our old family vacation spot. It had been sold years ago. Or so I thought. I kept scrolling, my hands shaking. Another post. Family weekend. So grateful for the blessings we've been given. And there, in the background, I saw it. A painting. One that used to hang in my childhood bedroom. The painting Mom gave me when I turned 13. She'd picked it from a flea market, framed it with her own hands. I thought it had been lost when I moved out. But it wasn't lost. It had been taken. Everything had. They'd gone through my things, reclaimed what they wanted, rewritten the story. Without me. A knock at the door startled me. I jumped to my feet, heart hammering, but it was just the delivery man. I stood there for a moment, package in hand, staring down the hallway like something might still come after me. Then I closed the door and locked it. I needed answers, and I needed someone who might still be willing to talk. There was one name I hadn't thought about in years. Aunt Naomi. My mother's sister. She had always been the outsider. The one with loud opinions and red lipstick who called out hypocrisy at Christmas dinner. We were never close, but I remembered something. She didn't like my father. She used to say things like, "Don't trust a man who smiles without his eyes." I hadn't seen her since the funeral. My mother's, I mean. But maybe, just maybe, she hadn't bought the story. I searched for her online and found a business listing. A flower shop in the next state over. Still active. Still hers. I picked up the phone and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a voice answered. Naomi's Blooms. Aunt Naomi, it's Claire. Silence. The kind that stretches too long. Then, Claire? Is this some kind of joke? Number, it's me. I'm alive. And that's when I heard it. A gasp. Then, oh my God. She believed me. Someone still believed me. Aunt Naomi didn't ask me how I was. She didn't say, "It's been so long," or "I'm glad you're okay." The first thing she said after the silence was, "I knew something was wrong the moment I read that obituary." Her voice was shaky, angry. She told me to come the next day, early, before opening hours. "I don't want anyone listening in," she said. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. The drive took 4 hours, but I barely noticed. My mind kept looping between past and present, trying to stitch the pieces together. The cold words Dad said that day. We're not family anymore. The locks changed, the silent phones. And now, the obituary. It felt less like a story and more like a crime. The flower shop was small and hidden on a quiet street corner. A chipped wooden sign swung above the door. Naomi's Blooms, painted in faded pink script. She was waiting for me behind the counter, arms folded, lips pressed into a tight line. Older than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp, still skeptical. "You look like hell," she said. I cracked the smallest smile. "Nice to see you too." She didn't smile back. We sat in the back in a cramped office that smelled like soil and lilies. I showed her the obituary, the death certificate, the social media posts. My hands trembled as I laid everything out, but Naomi didn't flinch. She just sighed. Then she pulled out a file folder from a drawer and slid it toward me. Inside, newspaper clippings, printed emails, and a copy of a legal notice. Probate court filings. I scanned it, and my blood ran cold. The estate of Claire Bennett, deceased, has been distributed to the remaining beneficiaries, Richard Bennett and Jacob Bennett. My father and brother had taken everything, even what didn't belong to them. I looked up, my voice barely audible. "You kept this?" Naomi nodded. "When I saw your name in the paper, something in me screamed it wasn't true. I knew how they treated you after your mom died. I always thought it would come to this, but I never thought they'd go this far." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's something you need to know, Claire. Your mom, she had another account. Separate. Hidden." My breath caught. "What kind of account?" "A savings bond. She opened it before she married your father. Back then, she didn't trust anyone. She used to say, 'Always keep something in your name, just in case.'" Naomi opened another drawer and handed me a yellowing envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the bond registration. My name, my social security number, my mother's handwriting in the margins. "But it was never claimed," Naomi said. "Not officially." My hands shook. "So they couldn't touch it?" "They tried," she said. "The bank flagged it. Said there was no death certificate on file for you at that time. And guess what happened next?" I didn't have to guess. I already knew. They filed the certificate. They killed me on paper to access everything. Naomi sat back in her chair, eyes glittering. "They needed you out of the picture, entirely, so they could take it all. Your inheritance, the trust, even the house your mom left you in her will." That last part hit like a punch. "The house? That was in my name." "Was," she said, "until they filed you as dead and transferred it to Jacob." I stared down at the documents, my entire body trembling. It was like staring at a story written by someone else. A cruel, twisted one where I didn't exist anymore. "What do I do now?" I asked, voice cracking. Naomi didn't hesitate. "You fight." She pulled out a pen and scribbled something on a business card. "A lawyer I trust. She's handled inheritance fraud cases before. Take all this to her. You've got proof. And now you've got me." For the first time in 5 years, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope. Not yet. But something solid. Something alive. I have one more question, I said. Did they ever grieve? Did they ever seem sad? Naomi looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. They looked relieved. That single word told me more than any document ever could. They hadn't mourned me. They'd celebrated. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest. They think I'm dead, I said. Naomi nodded. Then maybe it's time to show them you're not. The office was smaller than I expected, modest, quiet, tucked between a dentist and a dry cleaner. But inside, it felt like stepping into a war room. The lawyer Naomi referred me to was a woman named Dina Shah. Early 40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense tone. She wore her confidence like armor, and when I slid the folder across her desk, she didn't flinch. She simply opened it and began reading in silence. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I sat there with my hands clenched in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up. This, she said, isn't just inheritance fraud. It's identity fraud, document forgery, financial misconduct, probate manipulation, and depending on the insurance claims involved, maybe even federal charges. I blinked. So, I'm not crazy? Dina leaned forward. No, Claire, you're not crazy. You were buried. That word again. Buried. But this time it didn't hit like a punch. It landed like a challenge. What happens next? I asked. We'll file a motion to revoke the death certificate first. That alone takes time and proof, which, she tapped the folder, you clearly have. Then we move on to the fraud investigation. But here's the thing. She paused. They're going to fight back, and the courts move slow. I nodded, already expecting that. There's one more thing, I said. They're holding a memorial this weekend for me. Her eyebrows shot up. A memorial? Even though they already had a funeral? Yes, I said. I got an anonymous text. No name, just the words. They're holding a memorial this Sunday. St. Martin's Church. 2 p.m. Dina sat back in her chair, calculating. That's public, emotional, symbolic. I nodded slowly. And I plan to be there. She hesitated. Claire. I'm not just fighting this in court, I interrupted. They stole my voice, my identity, my story. I'm taking it back. Silence stretched between us. Then a slow smile crept onto her face. In that case, she said, you're going to need backup. The days leading up to the memorial were a blur of legal filings, affidavits, and deep, cold resolve. Dina worked fast, pushed emergency motions, collected certified copies of my passport, employment contracts, tax records, housing agreements, even surveillance footage from the flower shop on the day I called Aunt Naomi. Everything that proved I had never died, that I had been here, just silenced. But it wasn't just about proving I was alive. It was about why they wanted me dead in the first place. Late Friday night, I found myself back at my tiny apartment, files spread across the floor. Somewhere in the paperwork from Naomi was a single letter, folded and yellowed, addressed to my mother. It was from her lawyer. A draft from years ago, updating her will after her cancer scare when I was in college. I unfolded it slowly. The final version had never been filed. But in that draft, it was written clearly. In the event of my death, my personal assets, including the trust account and summer property, will be divided equally between my daughter Claire and my sister Naomi. Jacob will receive nothing until completing financial rehabilitation counseling and maintaining sobriety for a minimum of 2 years. I stared at the sentence until the ink blurred. My mother had known. She had tried to protect me. And when she passed suddenly, that version never saw the light of day. My father must have produced an older copy, one without those restrictions. Or worse, forged a new one. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept playing it all back in my head like a crime thriller. Jake stealing, Dad blaming me, the locks changing, the death certificate, and now a memorial to mourn a daughter who wasn't even dead. They thought I'd stay gone, but I wasn't gone. I was walking into their lie with the weight of every truth they buried. Sunday came. The sky was a heavy gray, like it couldn't decide between sun and storm. I arrived at St. Martin's an hour early, dressed in black, a long coat, and sunglasses. From across the street, I watched as cars began to line up. People in dark suits and solemn dresses stepped out with tissue boxes and sad smiles. I recognized faces. Distant cousins, family friends, old neighbors. All of them thinking they were here to mourn me. A giant blown-up photo stood at the entrance. My face. The same photo from the obituary. Candles flickered around the edges. It was surreal. Inside the church, a choir rehearsed quietly. The organ hummed. A white program sat on every seat. In loving memory of Claire Bennett. The final curtain. I took a deep breath, heart pounding. Today wasn't just about revenge. It was about resurrection. I waited until the last note of the choir faded, until the priest called for silence. From the street outside, I watched people bow their heads, eyes closed in reverence for a death that never happened. The heavy oak doors of St. Martin's stood open just wide enough to beckon in grief. It was time. I stepped off the curb and crossed the street, each step slow, deliberate. My heels struck the pavement like drum beats, click, 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 echoing louder than the whispers that would follow. The sunlight cut through the clouds just as I reached the top of the stairs, casting my shadow across the church threshold. And then I stepped in. The air inside was thick with floral perfume and rehearsed sorrow, the scent of lilies and lies. All eyes were forward, watching the priest speak over the closed casket draped in white silk. The same portrait of me stood on an easel to his right, framed by roses. He raised his hand gently. Let us now observe a moment of silence for Claire Bennett, a beautiful soul gone too soon. Everyone rose. That was my cue. I pushed open the doors fully. The creak was loud. Too loud. Deliberate. Heads turned. The silence shattered. Gasps rippled through the crowd like thunder across a still lake. From the back of the room, I could see them. My father in the front row, head bowed, hand on his heart. Jake next to him, staring at the ground. My old piano teacher a few rows back. Even Mrs. Ellery, who used to babysit me. And every single face lifted. Eyes widened, mouths dropped. Shock, confusion, fear, and something else. Guilt. I walked down the center aisle slowly, the heels of my boots clicking on marble like a countdown. Jake stood up first, his face pale. Claire? He whispered, his voice cracking. My father didn't move. His body went rigid. I kept walking. My mother's absence was loud. Even in death, she would have seen through this. At the front, the priest stepped back, uncertain. His hand trembled on the pulpit. I reached the front row. Everyone was frozen. Then I turned around. I faced the crowd, my own eulogy audience. The photo of me smiled over my shoulder, but the real me stood, breathing, heart pounding, eyes clear. I took off my sunglasses and looked straight at the man who signed my death certificate. Hello, I said. My voice was calm, clear. My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm not dead. Someone in the back gasped. A phone clicked on. A red record dot blinked. Good. Let the world see. My father's jaw clenched. Jake sat down hard, like the air had been punched from his lungs. I know you were told I died peacefully, that I battled depression, that I faded away in silence, I said, scanning the room. That's a lie. I pulled out the envelope from my coat. Thick, sealed, stamped. These are my passport stamps, my tax filings, my employment records, my lease agreements. I've been alive, working, paying bills, surviving, for 5 years. The priest took a step away from the podium, slowly backing off like he'd just realized he was part of a fraud. I wasn't missing. I wasn't unreachable. I was erased. I turned to face my father. You filed the death certificate. You declared me dead to the state. And you... I pointed to Jake. You accepted money from my estate. You took what was mine. Jake stood up again, fists clenched. Claire, we thought... No. I cut in. You knew. You knew I was alive. You knew exactly where I was. You just didn't care. Another phone lifted. Someone whispered, "She's got evidence." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. I turned back to the audience. You didn't come here to say goodbye to a daughter. You came here to bury the truth. But here I am. I paused, letting the silence hang. I buried the version of me who begged to be heard, who waited for a call, who thought family meant loyalty. That Claire is gone. But this one? I pointed to myself. This Claire is done being quiet. I reached into my coat again and pulled out a second envelope. This is a court order, filed yesterday. A motion to revoke the fraudulent death certificate and open an investigation into identity theft, forgery, and inheritance fraud. Jake's face went white. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the pew. I dropped the envelope onto the podium. The thud echoed through the chapel. And one more thing. I looked up at the portrait behind me. You can keep your fake eulogies and your flowers, but you don't get to write my ending. That belongs to me now. Then I turned, walked back down the aisle and out into the daylight, leaving behind a room full of ghosts pretending to grieve. The bells of St. Martin's began to ring. How fitting. A funeral bell. But this time, not for me. The footage from the memorial went viral. By Monday morning, I was everywhere. TikTok, Facebook, even a headline on a local news site. Woman declared dead walks into her own funeral with evidence of fraud. Someone had filmed the whole thing. Me walking down the aisle, the gasps, my confrontation, the silence that followed like a dropped bomb. They posted it with a single caption. She's not dead. They just wanted her gone. It exploded overnight. I didn't plan for any of it. I didn't expect strangers to care. But apparently there's something universal about betrayal, about being erased by the people who were supposed to love you. By the time I walked into Dana Shaw's office again, the court had already set an expedited hearing. The public pressure helped. And so did the fact that the fraud was no longer just theory. It was documented, filed, recorded, evidence everywhere. Dina had everything stacked in a black folder. Proof of life, bank records, transfer logs, the invalid will, my mother's missing estate files, even Naomi's original copy of the unfiled draft. This is airtight, she told me. But are you ready for what comes next? I nodded, even though part of me wasn't sure. Your father and brother are going to come for you. Not physically, she added quickly. But they'll spin the narrative. Say you ran away. Say you lied. Say you're after money. I didn't flinch. Let them talk, I said. I've got the truth. She nodded. And now the law does too. The courtroom was cold, clinical, nothing like the church. No candles, no flowers, just facts, just evidence. Jake sat on one side with his lawyer, my father next to him, stiff in a suit I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. His face was unreadable. Jake looked uncomfortable, like he hadn't slept. I sat across from them, alive, steady, unforgiving. The judge reviewed the files slowly. Then he looked up. Ms. Bennett, can you confirm under oath that you are Claire Bennett, born July 3rd, 1991? I can, I said clearly. And I am. And that you are, in fact, alive? I didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. I've never been more alive in my life. There was a beat of silence before he nodded and moved on, his voice calm but firm. Then let the record reflect that the death certificate for Claire Bennett is hereby revoked, legal identity restored. I exhaled, but only slightly. That was only the beginning. Then came the fraud charges. My father's lawyer tried to argue that it was a tragic mistake, that he believed I was dead, that I'd disappeared, that he filed in grief. But my apartment lease, my employer's testimony, bank transactions, and passport stamps told a different story. I hadn't disappeared. I had been deliberately ignored. Worse, the transfer of funds from my trust to Jake had happened just 3 weeks after the death certificate was filed. Not grief, greed. When the judge ruled in my favor, ordering the return of stolen funds, a criminal investigation, and a freeze on all accounts linked to my mother's estate, I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like silence. On their side of the room. Weeks passed. The news quieted. The videos stopped trending. But in my world, everything had changed. The trust was reinstated. The death certificate was officially expunged. I got my name, my life back. I even visited my childhood home, now under investigation for fraudulent transfer. I didn't go in. I just stood at the edge of the driveway. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Dimmer. Jake had moved out. My father, too. They were waiting on court dates, maybe even jail time. But I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to say goodbye. Because I wasn't going back. Not to them. Not to the ghost they tried to make of me. A month later, Naomi and I sat at her flower shop, sipping tea. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Coming back? Number telling the world. I looked out the window at the street. People walked by. Cars passed. Life moved on. I don't regret the truth, I said. Even when it hurt. Even when it broke me. She nodded, a soft smile playing at her lips. They thought they were burying you, she said. But they didn't know they were planting something stronger. I smiled back. They don't get to define me anymore, I said. I'm not the story they wrote. I'm the one I'm writing now.